My name is Anya, and I am 43 years old. I am a cartographer, but I don't map mountains or rivers. I map the unseen landscapes of human experience, the geographies of memory, the fault lines of trauma. Using layers of data, oral histories, and psychogeography, I create maps that show not just where a building stood, but the ghost of the life that was lived within it. My work is quiet, academic, and deeply human. My husband, Alex, is the opposite. He's a tech developer, a man who believes that any problem can be solved and monetized with the right algorithm. We were for a long time a perfect equilibrium. He was the pragmatist, I was the poet. He built the future, I preserved the past. He admired my work from a distance, calling it beautifully impractical. I was the soulful, non-profit core that gave his glossy, data-driven life a sense of meaning. Our home was a blend of our two worlds, sleek, minimalist tech-sharing space with antique maps and shelves of worn-out books. My most recent project was my life's work. I called it the Echo Map. A year prior, the Riverside district of Northwood had been devastated by a catastrophic flood. Hundreds of homes, businesses, and lives were washed away. The official city maps just showed a blank, empty floodplain, a wound on the landscape. But I was mapping what was lost. I was interviewing the displaced residents, collecting their stories, their photos, their memories of every street corner, every home, every backyard garden. I was building a multi-layered digital map that would allow you to walk the streets as they once were, to hear the echoes of the community that had vanished. It was a memorial, a digital act of remembrance. Alex was fascinated. He'd come into my studio, his eyes alight with an intensity one mistook for empathy. He watched as I plotted the location of an old woman's rose garden, the place a young couple had their first kiss, the site of a beloved family bakery. "This is revolutionary, Anya," he said one evening, looking at the complex web of data on my screen. "It's not just data. It's a map of a soul, the emotional heat map of a community. The applications are staggering." I glowed with pride. For the first time, he wasn't just admiring my work, he was understanding it. He offered to help, to use his company's resources to build a more sophisticated platform for the project. "Let me help you scale this," he'd said. "Let's give these stories the vessel they deserve." Blinded by love and trust, I gave him everything. Full access to my raw data, my interview transcripts, my methodology for translating human emotion into geographic data points. Our evenings were filled with collaboration, our two worlds finally merging. It was the happiest I had ever been. The first crack in our perfect world was an email I saw by accident. It was open on his laptop, an exchange with a name I didn't recognize. The subject line was Lazarus. Predictive analysis. I only saw a snippet of the text. The sentiment data from the floodplain is even richer than we'd hoped. The model's accuracy in predicting vulnerability to acquisition is off the charts. A chill snaked down my spine. Sentiment data. Vulnerability to acquisition. It was the cold, sterile language of his world, applied to my sacred ground. When I asked him about Project Lazarus, he was smooth, dismissive. "It's just a side project, honey. A simulation. Exploring how cities could rebuild smarter after disasters. It's nothing." He closed the laptop a little too quickly. The lie was a splinter in my mind, festering. A week later, I received a phone call from an elderly woman I had interviewed, Maria. She was the one who had told me about her rose garden. She was weeping, her voice thin with despair. "They're forcing me to sell," she cried. "A developer. They offered me almost nothing. They said my land is worthless, that the area will never recover. They said they had a report proving it." My blood ran cold. I spent the next 24 hours digging. The developer was a faceless corporation, but with a bit of work, I found who they were funded by, a massive venture capital firm. A firm that was, according to a press release I found online, the primary investor in Alex's new, secret startup, Lazarus Developments. The final, soul-destroying piece of the puzzle fell into place when I found the investor pitch for Lazarus on a private server he had forgotten to log out of. I opened the file. The title slide read, "Project Lazarus, Monetizing the Rubble." He wasn't building a tool to help cities rebuild. He had created a predatory algorithm. He had taken my map of memory, my beautiful, sacred echo map, and had inverted it. He had stripped it of all its humanity, all its grief, and had turned it into a vulture's tool. My map showed where people's hearts were broken. His algorithm used that data to show developers where they could strike the hardest, where the displaced and traumatized residents were most likely to accept a lowball offer out of sheer desperation. He had taken my map of scars and turned it into a treasure map for predators. He hadn't just stolen my work. He had weaponized my empathy. The collaboration, The shared passion, the late nights, it was all a lie. He had looked at the deepest, most sincere part of my soul, and all he had seen was a market inefficiency to be exploited. He wasn't my husband. He was a grave robber. The world didn't shrink.
It sharpened.
The grief of betrayal was so immense it became a lens, clarifying everything with a terrifying, cold precision. He had built an engine of cruelty from the engine of my compassion. I would not just expose him. I would dismantle him using the very data he had stolen. My first move wasn't emotional, it was forensic. Alex was a brilliant developer, but he was arrogant. He would assume I was just a sentimental academic, that I wouldn't understand the technical intricacies of what he'd done. He was wrong. My work existed at the intersection of human stories and hard data. And I was meticulous. Months ago, when I began compiling the echo map data, I had embedded a digital watermark within it, a ghost signature. It was a sequence of seemingly random, insignificant data points, a fractional shift in a coordinate here, an extra digit in a timestamp there, that, when analyzed correctly, spelled out my initials and the project's date of inception in hexadecimal code. It was my invisible, indelible mark, proof of origin that no algorithm could erase or explain away as a coincidence. He had copied the data, but I knew he would never have looked deep enough to find a ghost. I needed to prove his model was built on my watermark data. That meant I needed access to his final Project Lazarus presentation. He was on the verge of closing a massive, second round of funding with a legendary and notoriously ruthless venture capitalist named Sylvan Blackwood. Blackwood was a titan, a man who worshipped at the altar of data-driven results. The final presentation to him, scheduled in 2 weeks, would be Alex's coronation. It would be my stage.
I needed an ally.
I found him in Kenji, a junior data analyst at Alex's new company. Kenji was young, brilliant, and deeply disillusioned. I knew from a brief conversation at a company party that he had been drawn to the project by my original Echo Map research, which Alex had initially presented as the inspirational core of their mission. Kenji had believed he was helping rebuild lives, not targeting victims. I met him for coffee, my heart pounding. I laid out my suspicion, not as a wife, but as a fellow data scientist. I explained the concept of my ghost signature. I think he built the entire predictive model on my source data. I said, my voice even. I need you to run a diagnostic on the core dataset. Search for this specific hexadecimal string. I wrote it down on a napkin. Kenji looked at the code, then at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning horror. He didn't promise anything, but the next morning, I received an encrypted email. It contained a single screenshot. It was his diagnostic screen, with my hexadecimal ghost signature glowing bright green in a sea of code. The subject line of the email was just one word: confirmed. My plan began to solidify. I didn't want to just leak the story. I wanted the man who had monetized human tragedy to be undone by the one thing he respected, a superior data-driven argument. I wanted Sylvan Blackwood to be my jury and my executioner. The night before the big meeting, Alex was at home, rehearsing his presentation. He was electric, a supernova of ambition. He saw me watching him from the doorway of his office. "Big day tomorrow," he said, smiling that easy, confident smile that I now saw as a predator's baring of teeth. "After this, Anya, everything changes. The scale of what we can achieve." "I spoke to Maria today," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through his excitement. "From Northwood, the woman with the rose garden. Her land was bought by one of your clients." He didn't even flinch. The smile was replaced by a look of paternalistic pity. "That's unfortunate, but that's progress. We can't let sentiment stand in the way of rebuilding. You, of all people, should understand the data. The area is a lost cause for residents. We're giving it a new life." He said it with such conviction. He had so fully integrated my work into his predatory worldview that he now believed his destruction was a form of creation. There was no remorse. There was nothing left of the man I had married. "I see," I said. I turned to leave, then paused. "Alex," I said, my voice calm and final. "Make sure your data is clean tomorrow. Sylvan Blackwood has a reputation. He hates sloppy work." He laughed, a sound of pure arrogance. "Don't you worry about my data, Anya. It's flawless." "I'm sure it is," I said. He thought it was a wife's nervous warning. He had no idea it was a promise. The boardroom on the 50th floor of Blackwood Tower was a minimalist cathedral of glass and steel, overlooking the city. It was a room where empires were born or died. Alex stood at the head of a massive onyx table, his presentation glowing on a wall-sized screen behind him. Sylvan Blackwood sat at the opposite end, flanked by his analysts, his face an unreadable mask of stone. I was not in the room. I was in a small cafe miles away, a secure communication line open to Kenji, who was in the boardroom, tasked with running the presentation. I watched a pirated video feed from Kenji's phone. Alex was magnificent. He was a maestro, weaving a narrative of innovation, disruption, and inevitable progress. He presented Project Lazarus not as a real estate tool, but as a humanitarian solution, a way to channel investment into forgotten areas with surgical precision. The data was impressive. The predictive models were undeniable. He reached his final slide, a projection of staggering profits. And that, Alex said with a flourish, is how we not only rebuild our cities, but create unparalleled value for our investors. A heavy silence filled the room. Sylvan Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. He had one final question. "Your predictive model is remarkable," Blackwood said, his voice a low gravel. "The accuracy on the vulnerability index is something I've never seen before. What is the source of your foundational dataset?" "The raw human sentiment data." "How did you acquire it?" This was the moment. Alex smiled, ready with his prepackaged lie about proprietary data gathering techniques. In the cafe, I sent Kenji a one-word message. "Now." In the boardroom, Kenji discreetly pressed the forward button on the remote. It wasn't the end of the presentation. I had designed one final, hidden slide. The profit projections vanished, replaced by a new, stark white slide titled, "The Source Code, a Comparative Analysis." The screen was split in two. On the left was my Echo map, a rich tapestry of faces, handwritten memories, and photos of lost homes. On the right was Alex's cold, heat map diagram of acquisition opportunities. And in the center, a small diagnostic window was running. It showed Alex's code, and then, highlighted in a glowing, impossible-to-miss red, was the string of hexadecimal code, my ghost signature, my indelible proof of authorship. Below the images was a single quote, pulled from Alex's own stolen internal memo, the one from the Project Midas file. "We are not just forecasting market dynamics. We are mapping the precise geography of despair to unlock its value." Alex froze. The blood drained from his face. His confident posture collapsed. He stared at the screen in utter, silent horror. He was a ghost, haunted by the very data he thought he controlled. Sylvan Blackwood slowly stood up. He was not a man given to emotional outbursts. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "I have built my career on data," he said, his eyes locked on Alex. "It is the closest thing we have to truth. You have not brought me data. You have brought me theft, wrapped in a veneer of innovation. You have committed the one sin I do not tolerate. You are a fraud." He turned to his analysts. "The deal is dead. Escort Mr. Evans out." I closed my laptop. I didn't need to watch them walk him out. My revenge was not in seeing his humiliation, but in the quiet, mathematical elegance of the truth. He had built his empire on a foundation of stolen data, and I had just pulled out the single line of code that made it all collapse. I didn't file for divorce immediately. I waited a week. I didn't want any of his money. I wanted one thing: full, uncontested ownership of Project Lazarus, its algorithm, its data, and all its associated intellectual property. His lawyers, knowing I had him dead to rights, agreed without a fight. My final act was not one of destruction, but of reclamation. I took his predatory algorithm and, with Kenji at my side, I inverted it. We rewrote its core function. Instead of identifying the most vulnerable homeowners for developers, the new algorithm identified them for nonprofit legal aid and community land trusts, giving them the resources to fight back. We turned the vulture into a watchdog. I returned to Northwood. The memorial was now a real place, a small park funded by an anonymous donation from a guilt-ridden Sylvan Blackwood. I met Maria there, by a newly planted bed of roses. She didn't know the whole story. All she knew was that her community had been given a voice. "You remembered us," she said, her hand resting on my arm. Looking at the map of her face, etched with the lines of both grief and resilience, I finally understood the true purpose of my work. Alex had tried to map people's scars to exploit them. But I knew, now more than ever, that the only reason to map a scar is to understand how to help it heal.